It was a bright summer afternoon in the quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where lawns were manicured to perfection and every mailbox matched its neighbors. The Homeowners Association had organized what was meant to be the event of the season, the annual community pool party. Invitations had been sent weeks in advance, and the chatter of excitement filled the streets. Children carried inflatable toys and floaties, neighbors wheeled in coolers filled with drinks and snacks, and everyone was eager to escape the relentless heat for a few hours of sun and laughter. The pool itself gleamed under the sun, its sparkling blue surface reflecting the pristine surroundings. On one side, parents lounged on deck chairs, sipping iced tea, scrolling through their phones, and occasionally glancing at their children. On the other, kids splashed energetically, shrieking with joy, racing from one end of the pool to the other. It was a picture-perfect scene, seemingly lifted from a lifestyle magazine. But beneath the cheerful surface, small tensions lingered, unnoticed by most. The HOA had always prided itself on rules that some residents believed were overly strict, while others saw them as necessary to maintain order. Yet, the pool's safety guidelines had often been more suggestive than enforced. Lifeguards were technically optional, and though signage warned about no diving and supervision required, the reality was far more lax. Parents assumed others were watching, neighbors trusted the HOA's vague safety measures, and the community relied on a sense of shared responsibility that had always, until now, sufficed. Among the children, a boy of 7, curious and energetic, wandered along the poolside with a bright yellow inflatable ring loosely wrapped around his waist. His laughter echoed as he tried to catch up with a group of friends darting in and out of the shallow end. The parents nearby were distracted, some chatting, others fiddling with their phones, a few preoccupied with arranging snacks on tables. No one noticed when the boy's small steps faltered near the deep end. The pool's edge, slick from previous swimmers, betrayed the boy's balance. One misstep, a slight slip, and suddenly he was struggling in the water. Panic erupted silently at first, his small hands splashing desperately, eyes wide with fear, but the commotion only caught the attention of a few onlookers. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally as the boy flailed, the bright yellow ring flipping awkwardly as he tried to stay afloat. Neighbors reacted with a mix of shock and fear. Some screamed for help, others rushed toward the water. A man sprinted with surprising speed across the deck, diving in to grab the child just as a woman yelled for someone to call 911. The community pool, usually a hub of relaxation and laughter, had transformed into a scene of chaos. Chairs toppled, drinks spilled, and parents dashed to the poolside in a panic, some slipping themselves in their haste. Within moments, the reality of the situation began to sink in. This was no ordinary accident, no minor splash that would be laughed off later. The child was truly in danger, and the lack of proper supervision or lifeguard presence was glaringly obvious. Some parents cursed themselves for not paying closer attention. Others turned angry eyes toward the HOA, silently questioning why such a vital safety measure had been left to chance. Amid the panic, other children were lifted out of the water or held tightly by anxious parents. The sense of community, usually a source of comfort, was replaced by confusion and fear. The party had transformed from a carefree summer gathering into a tense emergency, where every second counted. In the distance, the wail of approaching sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of paramedics who would soon take control of the situation. Yet even as help neared, whispers began to circulate among the gathered crowd. Neighbors started pointing fingers, quietly blaming each other, murmuring about ignored safety rules and neglected pool inspections. The calm, idyllic neighborhood facade began to crack, revealing a fragile structure of rules, trust, and complacency that had been taken for granted for too long. By the time paramedics reached the pool, the boy had been lifted from the water, shivering and pale but alive. He was immediately rushed to the ambulance, and the surrounding crowd was left in stunned silence. Conversations turned to outrage and disbelief. How could such a thing happen in a neighborhood that prided itself on order and control? Why hadn't the HOA ensured lifeguards were present? Why had parents been allowed to trust the system so blindly? The incident left a mark on every resident who witnessed it. The once celebratory pool party would be remembered not for fun or sun, but for fear, chaos, and the glaring failure of rules that were more theoretical than enforced. And as emergency responders drove away, the seeds of tension and suspicion began to sprout, setting the stage for a storm that would ripple through the neighborhood in ways no one had anticipated. The sun continued to shine over the pool, but the laughter had faded. Chairs remained overturned, towels lay scattered, and a once pristine scene of summer joy had become a tableau of near tragedy. Conversations whispered along the sidewalks, neighbors wondering aloud about the accountability of the HOA, the responsibility of parents, and the hidden cracks in the supposedly perfect community. And far from over, the ripple effects of this single incident were just beginning to emerge. In the days following the pool incident, the neighborhood was far from the carefree suburban idyll it had once been. The air was thick with tension, whispers, and pointed glances. Residents who had once greeted each other warmly at the mailbox now skirted past, exchanging curt nods or muttered warnings. The near tragedy had left a lingering sense of unease, and the cracks in the community's veneer were beginning to show. The HOA board quickly convened an emergency meeting in the community clubhouse, a place usually reserved for discussions about landscaping guidelines or parking rules. Now, it was a war room for damage control. The president, a woman known for her stern demeanor and strict rule enforcement, attempted to project calm. But beneath her composed exterior, anxiety churned. Members debated frantically over liability, insurance coverage, and the optics of the incident. No one wanted the neighborhood to be labeled as negligent, yet the facts were undeniable. Safety rules had been loosely enforced, and the absence of lifeguards had created a perfect storm. Meanwhile, the parents of the child who had fallen into the pool were shaken to their core. Even though their son had survived without lasting injury, fear and guilt clung to them like a heavy shadow. They questioned every decision they had made leading up to the accident, allowing him to wander too freely, trusting the HOA's supposedly safe pool, even thinking a summer party could ever be truly carefree. Their anxiety bled into every interaction, every glance at neighbors, and every conversation about future pool access. Social media within the community flared with activity. Photos of the pool, videos of the chaotic scene, and whispered speculation spread rapidly. Some posts painted the child's rescue as heroic, praising neighbors who had jumped in without hesitation. Others, however, cast a harsh eye on the HOA, questioning why safety measures had been so lax. Tensions escalated online faster than the board could moderate them. Accusations of negligence were thrown like daggers, and the community began to fracture along lines of blame, responsibility, and perception. Karen, of course, was in the thick of the drama. The woman who had previously made minor complaints about pool parties, noise, and the occasional out-of-place decoration seized the moment like a predator sensing opportunity. She publicly criticized the board's failure, spreading narratives about how the HOA had allowed children to play unsupervised in dangerous conditions. Her posts went viral within the neighborhood, drawing sharp reactions from those who were tired of her constant interference, and fueling a public feud that promised weeks, if not months, of chaos. Meanwhile, whispers of legal action began to surface. Residents discussed the possibility of suing the HOA for negligence, citing bylaws that had been ignored and regulations that were never properly enforced. Legal experts, brought in by concerned homeowners, pored over the rules, identifying every oversight, every loophole, and every potential liability. The HOA found itself caught between defending its authority and acknowledging its shortcomings, a delicate balance that few boards could maintain without losing credibility entirely. As the neighborhood coped with the immediate fallout, deeper issues emerged. Some parents revealed that this was not the first time safety rules had been ignored. Lifeguard coverage had been inconsistent for years, inspections had been delayed, and warning signs were often faded or missing entirely. What had once been seen as minor lapses now seemed like systemic negligence, and the community's sense of trust began to erode. Conversations at fence lines, over backyard barbecues, and in hushed phone calls focused less on summer fun and more on accountability, oversight, and hidden dangers lurking behind the HOA's polished exterior. The pool itself became a symbol of the neighborhood's deeper failings. Once a place of laughter and relaxation, It now stood eerily empty, its water glinting in the sunlight as a reminder of what nearly went wrong. Some residents avoided it entirely, fearful of another incident or unwilling to confront the unresolved tensions. Others inspected it obsessively, checking depth markers, rails, and the condition of the deck, as if the simple act of scrutiny could restore the illusion of safety. Meanwhile, Karen's relentless crusade continued to stoke fires. She began attending HOA meetings with notebooks in hand, scrutinizing every decision, challenging every guideline, and loudly reminding the board of its perceived failures. Her presence polarized the community. Some admired her vigilance, while others despised the constant negativity she brought to what had been a close-knit neighborhood. Her influence began to shape conversations, dictate media narratives, and even sway public opinion among residents who had previously remained neutral. The center of it all, the child's family tried to navigate a world that now felt fragile and unpredictable. Every splash in a neighbor's pool, every unsupervised playdate, even casual discussions about the neighborhood felt heavy with memory. Trauma and relief coexisted uneasily, coloring every decision they made. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's collective psyche had shifted. What had been a carefree community governed by trust and rules was now a battlefield of scrutiny, suspicion, and simmering resentment. The stage was set for more revelations, more confrontations, and more dramatic twists. Secrets long buried beneath the HOA's polished exterior, missed inspections, overlooked repairs, minor incidents dismissed as harmless, were beginning to surface. Every whispered complaint, every casual observation, every viral social media post now carried the potential to ignite further chaos. And as summer continued, the neighborhood realized that what had started as a near-tragic accident in the pool was only the beginning of a storm that would challenge the very foundations of their community. The pool, once a place of joy, had become the epicenter of tension, suspicion, and rising conflict. And while the immediate danger had passed, the ripples of that single moment stretched far beyond the water's edge. The neighborhood's social fabric had been torn, and no one yet knew if it could ever be mended. As the days stretched into weeks, the once idyllic neighborhood teetered on the edge of chaos. The pool incident had opened a Pandora's box, and the reverberations were felt in every backyard, mailbox, and street corner. Parents were anxious, children were restricted from unsupervised play, and the community's trust in the HOA, once absolute, was now fractured beyond repair. The incident had exposed more than just a lapse in judgment. It revealed the hidden vulnerabilities of a system that had been taken for granted. The HOA board, initially scrambling to manage the immediate crisis, now faced mounting pressure. Meetings that were once perfunctory now became arenas of conflict, watched not only by residents but documented for social media. Every decision, every minor infraction, and every historical oversight was examined under an unforgiving lens. The board's authority, once unquestioned, was now challenged at every turn. Rumors spread that the association had ignored repeated safety inspections, allowed unqualified personnel to manage facilities, and failed to implement mandatory lifeguard coverage. These were whispers that quickly became headlines in neighborhood threads, inflaming tempers and polarizing the community further. Karen, predictably, seized the moment to cement her role as self-appointed guardian of accountability. Her scrutiny was relentless. She combed through budgets, records, and past incidents, highlighting lapses she claimed were symptomatic of systemic negligence. Some residents, fatigued by her constant presence and persistent critiques, began to resent her, but her voice had undeniable power. Local media picked up the story, painting the incident as emblematic of larger suburban mismanagement, and suddenly, the neighborhood's drama was no longer private. It was viral. Amid this turmoil, hidden tensions between neighbors began to surface. Long-standing rivalries, petty disagreements over landscaping or parking spots, and previous complaints that had been ignored suddenly gained new significance. Minor grievances were reframed as evidence of broader dysfunction. Families that had once shared block parties now debated fiercely over liability, insurance, and moral responsibility. The pool incident had become a lens through which the entire community evaluated itself, uncovering fractures that had been quietly ignored for years. Meanwhile, The child's family became a focal point. While grateful for their son's survival, they wrestled with guilt, fear, and the pressure of public scrutiny. Their private grief was made public, analyzed, and debated. Every action they took, from posting updates about their child's recovery to voicing concerns about pool safety, was dissected in online forums and HOA meetings. They had survived the immediate danger, but the long shadow of the incident extended far beyond a single day, influencing interactions, opinions, and even local policies. The HOA, now under intense public scrutiny, realized that their typical bureaucratic responses were insufficient. They initiated emergency audits, brought in professional lifeguards, and promised strict enforcement of pool safety rules. Yet the damage had already been done. Residents were skeptical of the board's intentions, some suspecting that these measures were more about public perception than genuine concern. Trust, once foundational to the neighborhood, could not be restored simply with new policies or empty reassurances. The scandal also prompted an internal reckoning. Documents uncovered during the audits revealed overlooked maintenance reports, unaddressed structural concerns, and a history of informal enforcement that favored convenience over safety. The board members who had long acted with impunity were now accountable, and whispers of resignations and lawsuits filled the air. Legal experts examined bylaws and insurance agreements, dissecting every clause, and residents wondered whether the HOA itself might face financial consequences or even dissolution. Throughout the turmoil, the pool, the site of near tragedy, remained a symbolic focal point. It had transformed from a communal joy to a stark reminder of negligence, a visible emblem of the HOA's failings. Signs were replaced, lifeguards were posted, and safety protocols were strictly enforced, but the psychological impact lingered. Children approached the water cautiously, parents hovered anxiously, and the community collectively recognized that some mistakes could never be fully erased. Karen, finally feeling that her vigilance had paid off, continued to monitor every development. She attended board meetings with renewed confidence, her presence ensuring that the neighborhood could no longer ignore safety or accountability. Residents either admired her tenacity or despised it, but her influence reshaped the dynamics of the community entirely. Even those who had previously dismissed her warnings now acknowledged that without external pressure, the HOA might never have acted. Ultimately, the incident forced the neighborhood to confront uncomfortable truths. The illusion of perfect suburban order had been shattered. Rules could not substitute for responsibility, oversight, or vigilance. Community trust, once assumed, had to be actively maintained. And while the child's near drowning was a moment of fear and chaos, it also became a catalyst for change, an undeniable lesson that the safety and well-being of a community could never be taken for granted. By the end of that turbulent summer, the neighborhood had been transformed. Families remained, streets were still lined with manicured lawns, and the pool continued to glisten under the sun. But the laughter was tempered by caution, the conversations tinged with awareness, and the HOA forever under watchful eyes. The incident had sparked chaos, unveiled secrets, and reshaped the community's understanding of responsibility. In the end, the near tragedy served as a stark reminder that even in the most idyllic neighborhoods, danger could lurk beneath the surface, and accountability was never optional. The sun reflected off the water as the neighborhood settled into a new reality. The pool, once a simple summer attraction, had become a symbol of vigilance and consequence. And as residents moved forward, they carried with them the memory of that fateful day, a day that had forever changed their community, their trust, and their understanding of what it truly meant to look out for one another.